On today's podcast, we sit down with music industry veteran David Andreone. David has navigated the music business for over 2 decades and has now ventured into the world of psychotherapy to support artists and creatives. In this insightful interview, we explore David's transition from the limelight to becoming a guiding light for artists dealing with mental health challenges. Discover the unique connection between creativity and mental health struggles, the impact of social media on artists, and the future of mental wellness in the entertainment industry. You can't afford to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we have the privilege of sitting down with the extraordinary David Andreone. David juggles his role in the music industry and television while transforming his passion to support artists into a practice as a psychotherapist. Delve into his unique journey from music executive to artist advocate and discover how he utilizes his deep understanding of the entertainment business to offer insightful psychotherapy tailored specifically for creatives. We'll explore how he addresses the pressure points of monetizing art, the ever-present imposter syndrome, and the navigating the conflict between art versus commerce. Plus, David shares how his organization, Artist Services, is providing cutting-edge mental health support while remaining deeply rooted in the creative world. Whether you're an aspiring artist or an industry veteran, this conversation promises to be both enlightening and inspiring. You won't want to miss this insightful dive into the minds of creative individuals and the support they need to thrive. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders! Are you an aspiring musician, artist, band, or future music business professional looking to take your career to the next level? Well, look no further. At MUBUTV, we offer personalized career counseling and coaching designed specifically for folks like you.
Imagine having both of us by your side, guiding you through every step of your music journey. Our sessions are tailored to meet your unique needs, focusing on critical aspects of your music career, such as refining your songs, defining your artist story, identifying your target audience, and enhancing your social media presence, just to name a few.
Whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your existing career, we've got you covered. Our comprehensive approach ensures you get insights on everything from live shows to branding and marketing strategies. We understand that every artist is unique. That's why our coaching is personalized just for you.
And here's the best part. We offer flexible coaching packages that fit any budget. Choose from individual sessions ranging from 30 to 90 minutes or save with our discounted 4-session packages. Experience custom sessions designed to enhance your music career with opportunities for greater savings when you choose bundled sessions. Investing in your musical journey has never been more accessible.
Imagine the clarity and direction you'll gain after just one session. The feedback on your songs, the strategies to grow your audience, and the confidence to perform live, all tailored just for you.
So why wait? Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Join us for your free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com for a transformative coaching experience that will elevate your music career. That's book.mubutv.com.
Hi, this is composer Simon Franklin, and you're listening to the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is music industry veteran and psychotherapist David Andreone. This was a fascinating conversation, Eric, for many reasons. Number one, as you know, and we've discussed many times, it's an area that you and I both have a lot of interest in, which is artists' mental health and dealing with that. David is, an interesting, both the guests that we have had in this arena, Ryan Dusak and David, both have come from the entertainment side. Ryan being on the artist side.
And David on the business side.
So what I thought made his conversation with us so fascinating was that he understood the aspect of navigating success from the front lines. He wasn't somebody looking at it from the outside objectively.
Right.
Which is an interesting
You're
point.
seeing it firsthand. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the whole thing of, how achieving success, commercial success or whatever, it doesn't necessarily solve personal struggles.
Right.
Which, is something that a lot of people believe. And, you get into that whole element of, why people's why. We've talked about that on many shows. Why are you doing this? Well, when I get that number one album, I'll be happy. When I get that relationship, when I get that big tour, when I have that number one single.
And when you achieve those accolades and you feel like you're still the same, it's the same thing that we talked about always with the famous Rick Rubin quote.
Yeah, which is, you can never truly be depressed until all your dreams come true.
I mean, it's so
true.
Yeah, it's such a huge, that quote haunts me because it's so true what it says. I thought one of the other areas, which we've talked about this before with the episode with Ryan Dusick from Maroon 5, which was the whole idea of imposter syndrome and how this affects artists, myself included, which is very common among artists, exacerbated by social media. It requires careful navigation to maintain mental health and personal authenticity. The great news that we always talk about is that the gatekeepers are gone. The bad news is that there's no more gates. So now the onus is on the artist to do everything. You're now the record label. You're now your A&R person. You're now your manager in some cases if you don't have that at this point. So there's so much more pressure. And then you add the added pressure of social media, posting every goddamn day. I got to do this. I got to do that. And jumping through hoops. You feel like you're a lab animal or something. It's crazy what that does to your psyche. And then, of course, the whole idea, am I good enough? The whole, and so that whole idea of that imposter syndrome, it's such a pervasive thing that happens within our industry with creatives. And I'm talking about not only musicians, but just people even in the business side of the space. And so it's an interesting, unique anomaly that comes up. And it's something that is very pervasive, and it's something that's very important for artists and people that are listening to this right now to watch out for.
Absolutely. And, you said a very important thing just now, Eric, which is that it is a syndrome that affects both artists and business people on the other side. A lot of executives have that.
A lot of high-performing executives.
Yeah, and people don't know who they are, but
right.
It's the same exact thing.
And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with David Andreone.
David, welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
We're so happy to be able to speak with you. You have a career. You had a career and have a career in the music business. And I guess my first question is, what initially inspired your transition from a successful career in music and television to becoming a psychotherapist? And was there a specific moment or experience that made you take the leap?
It's a good question. And truth be told, I'm still in the music business. I still, and in TV.
Right.
This was in addition to, as opposed to like in place of. It's funny. I realized during the pandemic, I had, a lot of idle time during the pandemic. And I realized that over the 20, 25 years of working with young artists, from writers to musicians to, all manner of creatives, that I was often wearing a therapist's hat. I found that I was providing counsel, I was providing support, I was listening, I was talking, and it was all kind of came from a very uneducated but very well-meaning place. And during the pandemic, I had long had an interest in psychology. During the pandemic, I was like, I think I need to go back and get my master's. I have the time. So I got my master's in clinical psychology. I knew the population I would be working with. I mean, I love kids, I love adolescents, I love old people, I love all types of different populations, but I knew the one population that I was best suited to work with was artists, because it's the population I know best. So that's kind of a circuitous way to tell you how I got to where I am right now.
David, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to ask you, how did your prior experience in the entertainment business shape your approach to psychotherapy for artists and creatives?
Yeah, 100%. I saw trends. I saw recurring trends and themes from the artists over the years. you don't have to be an artist to have depression. You don't have to be an artist to have anxiety. But the triggers for that depression, the triggers for that anxiety, and for any other manner of psychological ailments are similar in creative circles, because that's context, but also amongst creatives and artists. The artist mind is different. So those two things in tandem, you have this group of people who really do think differently, see differently. Some are neurodivergent, some are not. Some are just kind of see the world in a more artistic manner. That in tandem with being in an environment and context where you're trying to monetize art kind of makes art a little different and a little more challenging. And it also kind of can be unsettling for a true artist. Even if they decide on their own to enter that milieu, that context of trying to monetize art. And that's where I've worked forever, it's fine to be an artist who wants to sit at home and play in their room and not play for anybody. But the minute you want to get your art out there, it just becomes a lot more complex emotionally and mentally.
Yeah. As you're speaking, one of the things I'm realizing is that, having worked in the music business for 40 something years myself, is that what you were saying is not only so true, but it's also true, as you well know, David, of very, very successful artists who have made a lot of money and had success. Those same kinds of fears, those same kinds of doubts and insecurities, even though they're, legendary in their career, they still go through exactly what you were saying.
What's the Rick Rubin quote that you always say? Can't wait until you find out.
Yeah, the Rick Rubin has this great quote about that. He said, "You can never truly be depressed until all your dreams come true."
Yeah, it's such an amazing.
Oh man, I wish I'd said that. It's so true.
It's so true. That's such a profound, thing. And he talks about the source of where that line came from. He talks about, how people feel. And we've seen it all throughout our lives. If I just get that $1 million, if I just get that, platinum record or that number one single or that painting sold, or I get that number one tour or whatever it is, and people discover that they are exactly the same person and it didn't fill the whatever it was that they were hoping for.
So true. And in a way, that's kind of the 1% that we talk about, that I think Rick Rubin's addressing there.
Yeah.
The other 99%, it's a roller coaster.
Oh, yeah.
There are highs, there are lows, there are way more lows than highs. And being cognizant, I don't think a lot of artists are told that in the beginning, especially the younger artists, that, hey, odds are you're going to have lots of ups and downs. And hopefully a lot of ups. There's a lot of downs. There's a down period in every artist. There's not an artist that has not had some sort of a roller coaster career. Again, not everybody has a Billie Eilish career, and God bless her. Right. She's amazing, but she's pretty bulletproof right now. But every other artist, it's like to be prepared for that, especially at a young age. I think Billie's EP hit at 14, 15. Not a lot of 14, 15-year-olds, much less 25 or 35-year-olds, are really equipped for the ride,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And at least in her case, she was able to build toward it, 14, 15, 16, the record didn't come out, and the album, didn't come out till she was 17. And, there was that whole build that you're talking about, but it's very true. It makes you, I have a deep appreciation for anyone who can have that level of success and come out sane or relatively sane on the other end without, cracking up or going through drugs or whatever. But I wanted to ask you a question of, your work, which is, you having been on the front lines and worked with musicians and bands and other artists throughout your life, what are some of the unique mental health challenges that traditional therapists might not fully understand?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've had so many artists say, well, I'm so glad I don't have to explain to you what a royalty is. I'm so glad you understand that I got dropped and it had nothing to do with anything I had control over. I've had so many people say, wow, I don't need to explain the downturn and the lack of production in LA and the reason I'm not working as a writer. Or it's not, I work with musicians a lot, but I work in entertainment in general. So I'm working with TV writers and showrunners and cinematographers and directors and producers, in addition to music producers and writers and that kind of thing. I think it's understanding the context.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, again, like depression's depression, and you know, you can go to a therapist anywhere and they might be able to help you with different interventions and tricks and tips and referrals to psychiatrists and this and that. But, you know, to talk to somebody who's walked the walk and who knows what it's like to get dropped, or to actually even drop artists, you know, because I work with creative executives as well.
Sure.
I think it's just, you know, I can look them in the eye, they can look me in the eye, and they know that when I nod my head, I know I'm not bullshitting them, that I get it. I've been there. Yeah, I think it's context.
Absolutely. You know, David, the art versus commerce paradigm often creates a deep tension for artists. How do you guide creatives in navigating this conflict?
It's a good question. I mean, like I kind of touched on a little bit before, it's one thing to create art in a vacuum, and then the minute you decide, you know, you kind of want to like put it out there for public consumption, the rules change entirely. You know, Rick Rubin's amazing and brilliant, and one thing that he hammers home, and I agree with, is in the creative process, as much as possible, completely try to get out of your mind the finished product that you're working on, its place in the marketplace. Try to forget that. Try to forget your influences. And just make what you want to make and focus on what you think is your highest expression artistically. That kind of direction takes a ton of pressure off. And I think the byproduct also is that it results in better art, ultimately. Generally speaking. Yeah. I mean, I think, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It's an interesting question about, you know, how do you guide navigating during these conflicts? And so, yeah, I think it's something that's, it's a unique thing that once the artist
put
enter.
It this way. Yeah, put it this way. The art and commerce paradigm, you know, when those lines cross, it's pretty fantastic, and that's what everybody on the you know, industry side wants to find. And you know, it's an elusive intersection when they cross, but when they do, it's pretty amazing. Artists have always had kind of ups and downs and different periods, and you know, you look at Picasso or Basquiat or any visual artist, like their paintings over the span of their career looked different. And sometimes it resonated with the public and sometimes it didn't. But that was kind of okay. In the music world today, everything is so immediate that you can have artists aren't really given the license to evolve as most artists over the years have been given. So they're taught to stay in a lane, which is polar to most artistic minds. And they're taught to kind of like, if you find something that sticks, like stick with it.
Right.
And, you know, that's something that is discombobulating for a lot of artists and disorienting, and can be one of the things that results in being dysregulated or anxiety or depression.
The triggers, one of the big triggers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you have some white guy in a suit coming in and saying, you know, actually, do more of like this one, what you guys wrote here, this demo, replicate that like 11 more times and we'll have an album.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's like fingernails on a chalkboard to most artists.
Exactly.
So I think as a therapist, it's important to do a lot of things, but a lot of times it's really just kind of explaining at the very beginning when an artist gets a record deal. Well, a couple things. I always start with the label's not your friend. They might be friendly. They might be, you know, generous in the beginning, but it's a very conditional friendship, which means it's really not a friendship at all, because most friendships should be unconditional. So they have to understand it's a business relationship, even if they're really nice. And, you know, when you're 17, 18, 19 and you get $500,000 and a ton of adulation and somebody's helping you manifest your current creative dream, that's really seductive. And then when the rug is pulled out, which almost always happens, just, odds are statistically, just look at, the numbers. When that happens, that is an intense thing for like a later, like 22-year-old to deal with. And just giving them a heads up that, hey, just look at this. It is what it is. It's a great thing. It's a great opportunity. But they're kind of a banker, a really nice banker, kind of a cooler banker, but they're a banker. So, yeah.
No, it's so interesting. You've been on the front lines with this, David, for a while, and I'm curious from your experience, do you think there's a connection between creativity and mental health struggles? And if so, how do you frame this for your clients?
I do think there's a connection, and it's anecdotal for me. I'm not a PhD, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I've been working with artists since my, mid-20s, and I'm a little older than that now. So, for 30 some odd years, I've been doing this. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before, where I started seeing these recurring trends and just different maladies that were presenting that seemed to be, a common theme amongst artists. And I feel that what makes artists amazing can also be their sensitivity and the way they see things just a little bit differently can also be dysregulating for an artist. And that sensitivity that can make them perceive things and see things that much differently, just a few degrees to the left, and that becomes incredibly, appealing artistically to the public, can also be the thing that it cuts both ways, a double-edged sword. So I do think that creative people are different, and I feel that they need extra care because of that, and tailored care. And that's kind of the ethos behind the practice that I set up, Artist Services, is that we cater to creatives, artists, and creative executives. And we understand the context they work in. And we also understand that their agendas and perspectives and motivations are different from most other people because they are artists. Yeah, so a long-winded way of saying, yes, I absolutely believe the creatives are a different breed. And that in and of itself can make their existence trying, and a little harder when everybody else is not like them,
I definitely agree with you. Being an artist myself, and actually the song that I just put out, which me and Rich have talked about, in private, it's touching on mental health, but through the guise of a metaphor that I put in the song. And speaking from an artist, putting the artist lens on right now, the music, when you're writing, it's such a different art than everything else that's out there because it's such a personal thing to the person that's creating it. It's like they're our babies. You hear about that expression, songs are our children. And it's such a personal thing that, you're so insecure about how people are going to receive it, that's already triggering in itself. You're already almost like psychosomatically psyching yourself out. So I do think that, there's definitely a correlation, there for sure.
Yeah. And, talking about songs as babies, I was at Warner Chappell for 10-ish years as an A&R guy, signing writers. And I think there were a lot of publishers that were coming in, young people doing A&R, who the publishing companies, and I think the same holds true for labels in terms of the types of A&R people. Not everybody is sensitive. It really understands artists that well, and is sensitive to the fact that every song that they create is their next favorite song, or at least one of their babies, and it has a place somewhere on a traditional album. Maybe not a lead track, maybe not in the first half, maybe it's the final song, but it's still one of their babies. But A&R guys and young ladies and women that do A&R look at it very algorithmically, very cut and dry, black and white. There's 2 songs out of the 12 and then the other 10 that don't make the cut are disregarded. And that's really hard for most artists to deal with. So yeah, I mean, there's sometimes a bedside manner that a good A&R or creative executive has. And if you don't have that, it can be nurtured, it can be instilled. And some of the work that I do with creative executives, I'm like, well, do you understand why the artist was turned off when you talk to them that way? And with hindsight, they do. But at the time, they didn't. But once somebody, explains to them, like, no, you have to treat their art like it is art, and it's not just content. It's not just a widget,
Right.
So
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. David, how do you address the growing anxiety artists face regarding AI potentially replacing their roles in creative industries?
Well, I was actually just having a conversation this morning with somebody who's an aspiring filmmaker. They're a filmmaker and they aspire to do much more, and they're very young. And I said, you have to embrace it. It's not going away. You have to embrace it. And I feel the same way it's going to change the industry. It's going to change, so many industries. But, I think we're all old enough to see how you can't really fight it. You have to embrace it. And I feel like there's always going to be a place for artists and creators and composers and that kind of thing to do it better than the AI or to do it in a more human way. But, I know filmmakers who are making films right now and it's 80% AI. And it's going to look bad. It's going to sound bad until it doesn't. It's going to get better. And I feel that if you want to have a place in a commercial creative setting, basically from here on out going forward, you have to embrace this stuff. And if you demonize it, I think you're going to alienate yourself and, to your demise. I think that's my view on it. Do I feel it needs to be regulated? Oh my God, of course.
Yeah.
The industry in general needs a ton of regulation and it doesn't have a lot. Look at the payouts for streaming and look at, in my opinion, the labels and the publishers and large music management companies do a lot of lip service when it comes to mental health and mental wellness and how much they supposedly prioritize. But the bottom line is they don't have, I believe that there should be therapists in-house and on demand at the labels. And until the cost and the liability of not providing that exceeds the cost of providing it, it's just going to continue to be lip service. I think mental health should be preventative. I think if you're going in when you're anxious and depressed, you went in too late.
Yeah.
And, we have preventative care for our teeth, for our hearts, we have physicals. I strongly believe that mental health, that therapy should be something you do when you are kind of happy and strong, and it'll make you that much more resilient for the inevitable down, because life is full of ups and downs. Yeah. So why only go in when you're kind of at your breaking point? That's way too late.
Yeah, no, I
think that labels should provide that. I really do.
Yeah, one of the other guests that we had on the show, Ryan Dusick, I'm not sure if you know him from Maroon 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had him on the show recently and talked about that very thing about, do you see, I think I asked him the question, do you see that in the future where they would, because I would just think with dealing with young people to begin with, those are the people that are most vulnerable, that really need it early on, especially about the world that they're about to enter into. If they have some sort of success, how that can change everything for anybody. I don't care who you are.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. No, Ryan's a smart guy and I agree with him. And, his own experience, his cautionary tale of being young and getting too much too fast and going off the rails. And I don't think the label was really there. And if they had been there preemptively and said, the obvious, like, hey, and really focused on the kind of the artist as a whole, as a holistic system, a dynamic. I think that's really important. Most of my clients hear me say this. They even get a little tired of me saying it, but they are the center of the wheel. And there are there are actually many spokes to that wheel, 5 or 6 main spokes. And it's mental health, it's emotional health, it's social connections, it's nutrition, it's sleep, it's exercise. And, you can be depressed, you could take, an SSRI. And if you don't have those other 5 spokes of the wheel strong, the chances of the medicinal approach to treating depression probably isn't going to do much. But if you're exercising, if you're getting proper sleep, if you're eating well, if you are socially connected with people, I just believe that the spokes of the wheel are all important. And if one of them is weak, the wheel, either collapses or is kind of wobbly.
Yeah, it's an interesting, As you were speaking, I was thinking, as you were commenting on Ryan, he's one of the few that made it out. His ending, as terrible as the experience was a success. He was able to write the book and rebuild his life. And then I think, you and I have been in this business long enough to where, there have been several casualties who did not make it, Kurt Cobain or, the guy
Lane
from Lane Staley
right.
or any number, the guy from
Chris Cornell,
yeah,
on and on. The guy from Linkin Park. Yeah.
Exactly.
Chester,
it goes on and on, who, you wish had that kind of treatment or had gotten the help that you're speaking of.
I think it was just so taboo back then too. When you think of Ryan's era in the night, that was such a taboo subject.
Yeah, I know. And I even go back to when Kurt Cobain died and that same question was and it was kind of like, well, there was nothing we could do. I mean, that was kind of like the consciousness of is it really our job and how do we control people's behavior and on and on. And I think part of it does stem from, this unwillingness to address this particular issue. And we've seen the consequences of it. David, I want to ask you, the imposter syndrome, it's very common among artists. And I'm curious, how do you help them navigate this while still striving for growth in their careers? Because there is that challenge.
Yeah. And imposter syndrome's been around, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then in the, 90s, we got the whole internet thing and social media, 2000s. I think imposter syndrome is very common, number one, very real. I think it is exacerbated in a major way by social media because it's one thing to be an artist and put out an album and you have your artist persona and then you have your private life. But now there's very little gray area between the artist persona and the real person because everything is documented on social media.
Yeah.
It's just, it really kind of reinforces the fact that because that line is so blurred between, real and perception, it gets confusing for an artist as well. And they start to drink the Kool-Aid and believe that, well, maybe I am, this skinny, perfect, coiffed, caricature of myself that we've been selling, and Chappell Roan has a lot of artists have talked about and addressed it, but Chappell Roan has addressed it, recently. And also got some blowback from it.
Oh God, yes, that's the thing. Yeah, exactly. It's like those who stand up and talk about what you're speaking about and take a stance for themselves and for their own sanity do get that blowback, and that's the most interesting part. It's almost like, how dare you not be the image that we want you to be? How dare you stand up for yourself? And yeah, you see that a lot.
Yeah, and God bless her, and I hope that she has people around her who are like, you know what, actually, you speaking up is you being your authentic self, and you being honest with yourself, and recognizing and acknowledging that there's a fabricated persona, and then there's the real person. You have to remember who you are. An artist has worth regardless if they're dropped by their label. An artist has worth regardless if they get a bunch of ads at radio. An artist has worth even if the record tanks, and that is what they have to realize. And that's what they have to remember. And that's part of I almost think there should be an onboarding when, in a corporate setting, people are onboarded for 2 weeks. And I feel like an artist should be onboarded regardless of their age, but especially for the younger ones, hey, it is what it is. This is a business relationship. There's lots of ups and downs. Here's the reality. You will be best served if you create what you want to create, and if you remember the spokes of the wheel, you keep holistically healthy and you create boundaries that are safe. I know I'm going to get into a conversation with you guys about how hard it is for women. It's a minefield out there in terms of sexual harassment.
Right. Yes.
And these young ladies need to know, that's kind of the minefield that they're walking onto. And, I think just being honest and open about the nature of the industry, and it is an industry. And I think that can mitigate a lot of disappointment, a lot of shock when they're depressed. Shock when they're if and when they're dropped, shock when they are suddenly not prioritized and the emails aren't returned as quickly and that kind of thing. They can still go on and create art regardless if they have Sony in their corner or Warner Music Group in their corner, that kind of thing.
Yeah, do you know you know the artist Raye, Raye?
I do. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing. Now, her story personifies exactly what you're talking about and things that you've mentioned in previous points to this conversation. She was somebody who they made single after single after single after single. I mean, it went on for like 3 or 4 years. They never felt that they had like the one, to make the album with. And they eventually, I think it was after 4 years or 4.5 years, dropped her. And, and it was a very, very famous case especially in the British press that made a lot of noise about it and a lot of articles. And she went last year, as you well know, and produced an independent album that literally got what's the famous British...
The Igor Novello,
the Ivor Novello Award, as the number one artist for the year. I mean, and it was like quite a story, and it was right to the heart of what you were saying, that for her to be able to find that worth in a time when she was told constantly, you don't have it, you're not worth it, and then to be dropped after 4.5 years of, I think it was with EMI or Universal or one of those that did that, and Chapel Roan has a very similar story with Atlantic.
Yes. Yeah. And, I was actually just talking to an amazing artist here in LA. Her name is Ambar Lucid. And she was saying, it was dropped a couple of years ago. And now I'm in a new situation that she's really excited about. And I said, you're not really anybody till you get dropped. That's how common it is. And I said, when I was at Columbia Records, and it wasn't me, and I'm not going to say who it was, but we dropped an artist by the name of Katy Perry.
Yeah.
Katy went on to Capitol Records and they blew her up.
Right.
So many examples of artists that, are dropped, and hopefully, there's a team around. I asked her, she signed to a major publishing company that I won't say who. And I said, so when you were dropped, did your publisher swoop in and say, hey, we got your back. We're going to shop you. You're an amazing talent, and you're every bit as talented today, even dropped, as you were when we signed you and when the label signed you? And she said, no. She said, I never heard from my publisher. And as a publisher myself, that's where I was with writers through thick and thin, because I was from a distance, like a more of a macro view. I would see like, they got the deal, or they got LP1 just blew up and LP2 didn't, and they got dropped, or they get less priority. And that's when, as a publisher, we were like, okay, we're going to get them another label, or we're going to nurture their songwriting career for the very same reason why we signed them in the first place. Yeah. So I think for me, being a publisher before I was an A&R guy at a label helped reinforce that these are humans and not just signings. Right. They're actually people that were signing, artists that were signing, and their worth is intrinsic and not based on variables that are almost in every case out of the artist's control.
Hey, insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Eric, as an artist, what do you find are the most challenging aspects to a music career, especially when you're starting out?
Well, I think one of the first things is just trying to get the direction of who you are as an artist, where you want to go, where you want to be. And, we've talked about it on the show a lot. Who is your target audience? Who you are? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What do you think would resonate with an audience? And so those are some of the things that I would feel being a new artist. Obviously, what I know now is different because I know these things. But for people that are out there like our audience that don't have necessarily any direction to go would be the first things that I would start off with.
And having the songs that incorporate those elements that you're speaking of into it. That's so important today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we started MUBUTV and why we started this new consulting service that we're offering to all of our insiders out there, because that is another one of the big things. I mean, that is the big thing, is like having the great songs. That's what it really starts off. Our friend Don Grierson always said, it always starts with a great song. So that's probably, besides putting together what your audience and what your target audience audiences is the single most important thing. Where are your songs at currently today? Are you collaborating with people? Are you trying to go out to networking events where you can connect with other songwriters and stuff like that? So
yeah, and what are your strengths?
Exactly.
You know, are you a strong lyric writer? Are you a strong melody writer? Are you a strong musician, a player?
Right.
You know, and it's really important to get really strong clarity on those issues before proceeding.
I totally agree, Rich. And, you know, with our consulting services, we offer a myriad of different packages and we've made it super affordable for everybody. So, you know, if you guys are interested out there in connecting with us on a coaching call, you can visit book.mubutv.com and start off with a free 15-minute discovery call.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There we start with an initial 15-minute call where we can get a sense of who you are, what are the issues that you specifically have, right, and want to work on.
Exactly.
And we can go from there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we tailor everything to your needs. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. We kind of really want to get to know who you are as an artist, where you at today, what's the snapshot of you as an artist today, and then start trying to craft something that's tailor-made for you. So again, if you're interested, visit us at book.mubutv.com for your 15-minute discovery call. David, has the increasing awareness and openness about mental health in the entertainment industry changed the way artists seek support?
I think so, for sure. You know, there's only upside to the you know, people being able to talk more about mental health, mental wellness, emotional health, even you know, physical health as it pertains to drugs and alcohol and that kind of thing. The more transparency, the better. I don't think it's enough. I think it definitely, it's awesome that an artist now feels that they can, you know, post about their struggles or get off of a tour because they're feeling like they need to, you know, regroup, focus on themselves and get healthy. And we see that now, and that's a great thing. When I say it's not enough, I'm alluding to the labels still doing lip service. And I have to think it's the attorneys and the business affair attorneys who, at the end of the day, step in and say, yeah, there's too much liability there. It's implied liability. We're going to get in trouble. They're on their own, you know, that kind of thing. We wish them the best, but they're on their own. But the bottom line is that these artists do need a support system, and they are best served by a support system that is in-house and on demand. You know, same HIPAA confidentiality, same confidentiality from the label. Nothing that is said to the therapist goes to their A&R guy or the head of the label or the head of promotion or anything like that. But it's just imperative. And I feel that the labels who are traditionally late, you know, to change, I think they're late in this case as well. Even the film and TV industry I shouldn't say even, but the film and TV industry is farther ahead than the music industry. And the music industry, I feel like, is just really dragging their feet.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you're saying is that I find that a lot of the points you're making apply to giant artists as well. You know, I remember, what was it, 2 years ago, you talked about, you know, Shawn Mendes, I remember canceling a 54-city tour that was like practically completely sold out. I think like literally a day into the tour or 2 dates into the tour. I mean, it's a staggering amount of money, but he did that. And then in another field, if you remember a couple of years ago, at the top of her field, an Olympic gold winner, Simone Biles, pulled out because of mental health issues. Even at that level, you know,
and I think also tennis player Naomi Osaka was another one.
Exactly. Naomi.
Yeah, that's right. They did the same thing.
Yeah.
So this
and I have to think that some of these things could have been avoided if there had been preventative care.
Right.
You know, if you have a tour coming up that's been planned for 6, 7, 8 months, you have a lot of runway there to really take care of yourself. If you're canceling 2 days before, and I'm not blaming the artist, I'm blaming the lack of a system in place here.
Yeah.
If they had been dealing with, if they had been enabled to deal with whatever the malady was, the anxiety, the depression, whatever it is, the substance use that derailed the tour, but 6 months before, odds are very good that they probably would have been great to go on tour and the label wouldn't have lost all that money. That's what I'm referring to.
Right.
When the label realizes that it's going to impact their bottom line in a positive way, if they offer really robust mental wellness care, mental health care, then they'll do it. But until they realize that, or until they get, sued to high heavens by the next young artist's family or estate who dies, I don't know. I don't even know. They're kind of shameless, and I say they, I was a part of it and still am. But we can't be shameless. These are humans that we're dealing with. And yeah.
And David, speaking of treatments, how is your practice, Artist Services, uniquely positioned to help artists and creatives compared to traditional therapy practices? Can you talk about some of the innovative treatments that you offer?
Yeah. I mean, I think the secret sauce for us, and I'm happy to give it away, is that we walk the walk and we've been in their shoes. There are, you mentioned Ryan. He has the same secret sauce. Christy Mariner, Sarita Butler, there's a handful of really brilliant, bright, experienced mental health therapists out there who had senior level positions just like myself and signed bands that sold records just like myself and toured. I think that's really important. Understanding the context, the music industry or the film and TV industry means that you can tailor interventions more effectively. For example, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's incredibly effective, but it's all the more effective when the context of the life of the artist is taken into consideration. I think that's true for any intervention, whether you're talking about DBT or CBT, all these acronyms. But if you understand where the artist is coming from or where the person is coming from, then the odds of getting them back into a really healthy place are that much greater. If your population is first responders and you don't know the police community well, or you don't know the Army community well, or what it's like to be a returning vet from a war zone, I don't know that, and that's why I don't really work with that population. I have empathy, and could I help them? Yeah, possibly, but they're probably much better served by somebody who truly knows the horror of seeing some of the things they've seen. I feel like it's here at Artist Services, we have people that actually are still working in film and TV, still working in the music industry, and I think that matters.
Definitely. David, are there ethical and practical considerations when working with psychedelic-assisted treatments, especially in the entertainment world?
Yeah. I feel like it's so new. We're limited by a lot of things, and by what's legal, what's not legal. Right now, ketamine is legal, and so that's what we work with. I wouldn't say the great majority of our clients are engaging and are using psychedelic interventions, but that will increase. It's incredibly effective for some people. It's not a magic bullet. I have had some artists with addiction issues who've been intrigued by the idea of, ketamine-assisted therapy. And I've been really, really cautious and that kind of thing in terms of, going down that path with a substance when you're dealing with substances. So that, for me personally, I know other people who don't, but for me personally, I tread very carefully there. But I also have a lot of clients who swear by the effects of ketamine as it pertains to, especially to anxiety and depression. So I've seen it work. Is it a magic bullet? No, but it can be highly effective, in my view, if it's done in a clinical setting with, therapy, targeted therapy leading up to the experience, doing the experience, and then having a session afterwards that interprets and helps kind of process, put into action change, desired change. So yeah, it's an interesting time, and we embrace that here at Artist Services, and it'll be interesting to see where we are 5 years from now, when very likely MDMA and psilocybin will be legal as well.
Yeah, I think I just saw a piece recently, I believe it was on CNN, about them doing those types of treatments and saying the very same thing that you're saying, that it's not a magic bullet. So it was just very interesting. They had patients go in there and doing the treatments and seeing the before and after. So it was very interesting that we're talking about that now.
Well, SSRIs aren't a magic bullet.
Right.
Prozac's not a magic bullet. So it's just one more tool in the arsenal to help people. And for the right person, I can really, really help. And I know people who benefited from both psilocybin and from ketamine treatments in a clinical setting. And I also know people where it didn't really move the needle, so to speak, you know?
Yeah, it really depends on the individual. A very dear friend of mine who suffered from major depression issues was involved in a controversial treatment of, mild electroshock therapy. And he found it extremely beneficial. I mean, it made a radical change in his particular situation under, clinical supervision. And it wasn't like it was back then. It's
not like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
No. And it was very mild.
ECT is highly effective for treatment-resistant depression. Then there's a little less intrusive thing called TMS, which is more of a tapping minus the electrical on the cranial, they put a mask on their head. But TMS, ECT, there's just so many tools at our disposal, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. In the 80s, all the SSRIs came about, and that's very hit and miss. And when they work, thank God they work. Thank God we have them. But a lot of times it's hit and miss. It's 6 weeks to even see if it's going to work. Then you have to titrate down, and then you try another, and it's exhausting. It's hard on people. They're just trying to get out of a rut, and you're like, so. Yeah,
it's getting that. I mean, I went through that myself with depression, getting on medication, and then it's the adjustment of the medication, and then it's, do you up it here, and do you then add something else, like Abilify to it, and all of this. It's like, the chemistry, literally trying to get the chemistry exactly right. I wanted to ask you, for you, David, I mean, we've been talking about a lot of these different kinds of therapies and ones that, will eventually become much more accepted. What does success look like, for an artist undergoing therapy at Artist Services? How do you measure progress in such a personal and often intangible process?
That's a good question. It's case by case. It's very, very case by case. I've anecdotally, of course, I have some artists who are just paralyzed by anxiety, paralyzed by fear, and it manifests in 4 or 5 different ways that is limiting, that is self-limiting in many cases. And if there is a way to you set goals at the outset. When I have an intake, we find out what's presenting, what are the problems, how's it holding you back. And we'll create a plan, and over the next 3 to 6 months, because I think typically, very rarely can you do much in the first 3 months, but I say 3 to 6 months, we have benchmarks. And sometimes it feels very forced, and sometimes it feels very organic, but we have benchmarks. And if we can reach those benchmarks in that 3 to 6 month period, then that's success. It really is. If somebody is more able if somebody's able to be more creative, if somebody's able to tour, if somebody's able to not drink or do drugs, if somebody's able to be their authentic self, if they can reconcile, the art and commerce paradigm to the point that they can actually work with their label and create a commercial product. Sometimes it's just that, people have a really hard time reconciling, what did I do? I got involved with the devil here. I feel like I can't create what I want to create or what I most authentically want to create, and being able to reconcile that and kind of identify, the beast, the kind of the world that they're in, and having somebody understand that and be able to say, yeah, it is hard, and hear them and give them a roadmap on how to move forward, going forward in a way that doesn't sacrifice their artistry or their personhood, but at the same time furthers their career goals. If you can strike that balance between, look, you do care commercially what happens. And most artists that are with a label or with an agency or whoever, they do care. They do want to have commercial success, but because they're artists, it's not at any cost. They don't want to sacrifice themselves just to get that success. So if we can show them a way to be balanced and to be measured, but to still be highly creative, then that's a win. I think that's a huge win.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, you guys also offer creative and career mentorship at Artist Services. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, I work with producers, directors, people that, are senior level positions at labels. I alluded to before how I had one client who just really didn't know how to interact with artists and was at risk of probably even losing his job because artists were complaining about kind of his bedside manner and his demeanor. And being able to, having been on both sides and being on the label side, I was able to kind of like give him talking points, give him advice, give him, understanding of how what he was saying was being heard by the artists, that kind of thing. I have, on the coaching side, there's psychotherapy and there's coaching. On the coaching side, just like you guys, we work in LA, New York long enough, a ton of people. So I've been able to connect dots. I've been able to refer people to other people. I've been able to give advice in terms of, well, how do you handle the renegotiation on this contract? And who do you want to have in your camp? And who do you, what's lacking on your team? So I can't not offer that because it's what I know. I've worked at labels and publishers for so long that I don't think I could separate that. Now, I'm very clear with my psychotherapy clients. If we start delving into, well, here, let me, connect you with Rich. Rich is a super great guy. It's a separate informed consent, and I'm getting in the weeds here a bit, but it's a different relationship where suddenly I'm able to even let that so-and-so is a client of mine. So we discussed kind of some of the ethical guidelines that comes with doing psychotherapy and on the other hand, doing coaching. But most people are fine with it. There's not a lot of shame these days in terms of going to therapy, thank God. And when they realize that I'm kind of a therapist with benefits, like I definitely have some clients that are straight up just psychotherapy. In fact, that's probably the bulk, 60, 70%. But then there's that other 30, 40% where it's like people realize like, oh, he's a therapist with benefits. He actually knows, the guy that runs this label or the woman who runs that agency. So I answer your question.
Yeah, you did. No. And I had another sub question to that. In those sessions that you have that, you say kind of, I don't want to say cross the lines, but you say have different ethical considerations. Do you ever have sessions where both the psychotherapy and the career advice is all in one, or no, those would be completely separate things?
I have sessions for sure where it's one, where the kind of the left hand and the right hand, where they do cross. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I was just curious because I didn't know because of the considerations with, all that. Do you separate those or do they kind of blur the lines, so to speak?
You try to,
right.
And I'm just being honest here. Sometimes it's really hard to not have them cross.
Of course.
Oftentimes because the client might come in and, Monday morning they're in for their session and they're like, yeah, I have a deal with anonymous content that might be happening. It's causing me a lot of stress. So, okay, right there. We're talking about stress on one hand.
Right.
On the other hand, he mentions anonymous content, and we know people over at Anonymous, and we know the personalities there, and the different, how they work with their writers, and so it's sometimes very difficult to. I think when that happens and both sides start kind of crossing, I make a point to let them know, if we hadn't before, that we're kind of leaving the psychotherapy realm, and this is going to delve into some more. And if I do speak to somebody over there, it would only be on their request,
Got it.
No, that makes total sense. David, I want to go back for a minute. In the last, I'd say 7-8 years, the role of women in entertainment, sexual harassment has really been pulled out and exposed extensively, on the world stage with, Weinstein and with so many others. And so much of it seemed to center around, film and television. And, those of us in the music business realize the music industry, with very rare exception, seem to escape that particular element in the way that other industries really got the light exposed. And, you had talked about earlier just the role that women face in terms of harassment. Is this something that you see continuing extensively even today? Has there been any change in the last couple years around that subject, given the amount of attention and heat on a conscious level that's been placed on it within the business from your point of view?
I think that it's gotten better, but but it was such a bad place. The fact that it's gotten better doesn't mean that it's still not in bad straits.
Exactly.
I feel like the 21 to 30-year-old A&R hire who's coming in, whether it's a man or a woman, came up at a time when they were told, like, hey, that's misogynistic. Hey, that's abusive. That is racist. That is, and these behaviors have been called out.
Called out, yeah.
And
Right.
maybe part and parcel because of how visible they were in the film and TV world or in other aspects of business. I mean, I've seen so much of it. You know, I started in the music industry in '95,
And was
and I
commonplace.
saw so much. Very commonplace. And you know, it's still, I know it's commonplace today still because I have female artists or creatives who tell me as much. It's done a little more. The word, I guess, it's a little more behind the scenes, not quite as obvious,
right?
But it certainly still happens, and
it's insidious.
I think, and I think that some of that onboarding that I talked about earlier has to include, you know, when you're late at night at your producer's studio and people are getting high or people are drinking or it's 2 a.m, you have to be extra cautious. And if anything happens, you tell somebody. I also think for people that are like 16, 17, 18, 19 who are signed to a label, they shouldn't be at a studio at 2 a.m. with their producer.
Right.
And if they are, they should have their shadow therapist there.
Yeah.
Or their parents or
That's
their
a common
guardians if they're underage, yeah.
And those types of guardrails exist in film and TV. They don't exist in music.
Right.
You know, there's so many union regulations on the film and TV side. Like, there's no way a 16-year-old or, you know, would be in a studio. I signed Michelle Branch when I was at Warner Chappell when she was 14, I think. And God bless her. Like, she managed to kind of come out unscathed, but kind of you know, I mean, back then there were really no guardrails, and she was in a lot of compromising situations, but did okay. It doesn't always work as fortunately, you know.
Yeah, and there's many different levels to this. I mean, it's not only with artists, but you know, you remember the whole Sony situation with I forget the executive that they let go because it was so egregious, and then you had the whole thing of Sony Music Australia, where they let the head of the company go, and it was, you know, the investigation proved that there was just massive amounts of, you know, condoning of this kind of behavior for years, you know, people coming forward. So it's not just at the artist level or young artists being taken advantage of. It was a consciousness. It was a culture of this kind of consciousness that permeated the way business was done. And, you know, I mean, I remember just being in the business in the 80s. And even when you look at movies and TV shows like today from that era, and you realize like that kind of shit you would never be able to talk like that now about somebody. You just wouldn't. Right. That would not be accepted. You would be called out for that in a way that was it was totally accepted back then.
Yeah. Well, thank God that we evolve and change and get better. Sometimes I think this attack on woke culture is unfortunate because, yes, woke culture can go too far, but at its best, it's just empathy. It's just looking out for people. And can it go too far? Yes. But empathy is important. And when you realize that things you're saying or things you're doing are hurting other people or hurting whole populations, you know, and when you realize it's not good for your career to do it, and there's a reaction to the action of you acting that way.
Right.
So whether you're being a good person for the right reasons, the wrong reasons, or a combination of the two, the net takeaway is that artists of color, female artists, non-binary artists are in a safer environment because of the elevated humanity, you know, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Let me ask you, David, from where you sit, where do you see artist services evolving to in the next 5 or 10 years, especially as conversations around mental health and technology continue to shift and evolve?
Interesting. I'd like to see us be embraced and embedded in the actual like label and publishing and management company system. As of now, there's been, from the large label groups, music groups, there's been a verbal spoken interest in doing this, but at the 11th hour, they haven't pulled the trigger. And I think it's largely due to liability. And again, I addressed this before, like they feel that the liability of getting involved is riskier than not getting involved. So they take the route of kind of hands off. Now they'll say, oh, no, our insurance covers mental health. But the problem with insurance is that mental health, the way they'll cover it is it has to be deemed medically necessary. Now, that means you have to pathologize everybody that comes in just because they're stressed out over creativity or just because they are trying to deal with the roller coaster of no insurance company will cover that. Right. You have a lot of people who need help, need support, but because of the insurance system and it not being medically necessary, at least by their definition, they don't end up getting therapy. That's why you need somebody in house who's like, hey, you don't have a DSM diagnosis. You're not sick. It's just life. And we're just giving you tools how to navigate elegantly different environments. And you happen to be in a new environment, which is really foreign to most people. And that's called a record label. And they're going to shower you with compliments and money and new clothes until they don't. And then the minute they don't, that's going to affect anybody. And yeah, I mean, and as it pertains to technology, I think it's really just acknowledging and even embracing, but figuring out how to work in the confines and still be an artist in spite of, I mean, look, we had graphic designers and computers came around. A lot of it was taken care of with graphic design via technology. This technology is always going to have a role and kind of an intrusive role on the creative process. But there are still new artists today, and that'll continue, 25, 50 years from now, I think.
What do you think it's going to take, David, for the labels to finally pull the trigger and say yes? Besides, advocacy that you guys are doing, what do you think would it finally take? Would it take a tragedy to happen with an artist to finally?
Well, I don't think it's another tragedy because there's tragedies all the time, and even, I hate to get too dark here, but even with some of the things that like Chapel Roan has said, if she were to again, God forbid, but if she were to pass 6 months from now at her own hand, a lot of people would be like, oh, come on, just look back at what she said. We should have known. We should have swooped in. And we're not swooping in. And we need to be proactive. People need to be going to therapy when they're doing well, when they're strong, when they're resilient, when they're happy, and when they're not addicted, whatever the behavior is, they need to be going so that those behaviors, they don't get off the rails. And, I look at Chapel, I look at some other artists who've been vocal recently, and that's when the label should be coming in. And, I hope they are, and maybe they are, but that's when the label should be coming in and saying, hey, you're amazing. We want to help you be healthy emotionally, mentally, and anything we can do to help to that end, we want to be a part of.
Definitely.
But they're not doing that right now.
Yeah. David, from your frontline perspective, what do you feel holds artists back from succeeding in their careers today?
Imposter syndrome is huge. And like I said, social media exacerbates it and makes it much worse. I'm sure Dylan and Prince and, any number of artists, pre-internet artists, had imposter syndrome, but it's nothing like today. I have recommended to some artists, get off socials, have other people do it for you. Do not, it's super toxic.
Yeah.
And it reinforces the huge gap between who you truly are and who the public persona is of you. I feel like giving artists an honest read on kind of the context of the relationship the nature of the relationship that they're entering into, that they can be an artist with or without their label. It's just icing on the cake right now that you have somebody who's willing to bankroll your art. I think it's self-doubt. I think it's a overabundance, an over focus on social media, and I think those are two big ones. I mean, look, there are many, and again, it goes back to, I think that you have this. We are systems. We're complex systems, and if you have 3 or 4 of the spokes of the wheel in place, but 2 of them are not, you're not going to be holistically a healthy person or a healthy artist. You're not going to be creating at your best. And there's a lot of these spokes of the wheel are ignored by the label, in fact, and written off as, well, that's rock and roll behavior, or he or she's an artist. And, I've worked with a lot of artists over the years, and truth be told, the ones that were most successful were not the stereotype of the drug taking, drinking. And these were some pretty wild artists that I worked with. But at the end of the day, they really valued their sanity and their health. And I think they knew how to safeguard that, And so now in my position, I can pass some of that along and maybe help keep artists grounded and in touch with who they were before they had their deal, to help kind of, that's really their secret sauce, That's why they got signed. Most people have all their life to make their first record, and it's often their best record because it's really kind of authentic to who they are. And if they can hold on to that going forward, in spite of social media, in spite of the pressures, in spite of the very conditional relationship that labels have with artists, if they can hold on to who they truly are, then I think that emotionally they'll be happy, and creatively, commercially, they'll have a greater chance of success.
I couldn't agree with you more, and especially about social media. We've talked about it a couple of times during the course of our conversation today. And, I've told Rich, and we've talked about it on the show, that I believe that we are like in the midst of the precipice of like the stock market crash that happened in the 20s and 30s, yep. That we are in the midst of a social media crash because it is just too much all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we don't close. And I think from an artist perspective, at the end of the day, less is more. So, this whole idea that I need to be in the constructs of, I have to be constantly doing this. I got to do dance videos. I got to do this. I got to talk about, what I ate today or whatever. It's just too much. So
Eric, I agree 100%. Your lips to God's ears. Hopefully that will be the direction that we, societally will take, because I think it's to our demise if we don't,
No, absolutely. David, I want to shift gears here and ask you a sort of a personal, professional question. Throughout your life, have there been any books or films that you have found to be particularly inspirational to you, professionally speaking?
Yeah, I'm going to date myself, but there was a book called Personhood by a guy named Leo Buscaglia in the 80s, and maybe it was what he wrote, maybe it was me being in my 20s, but it really resonated with me. And it was about how to reach full personhood. And the ethos of that book has been retold with other terms and other kind of a different marketing angle in subsequent books. But back then it was just really pretty simple. It was about ways to reach full personhood was being healthy with yourself, being a responsible citizen in the world, being a good partner, it was very Buddhist in a way. It was very conscious of self, but also how we treat other people. And personhood definitely influenced me a lot. In terms of movies, that's interesting. Once this interview is over, I'll probably text you and say, "Oh, it's actually 6 degrees of separation," or
right,
something like that.
David, as you reflect on your journey, what unexpected lessons have you learned, and how have they changed your view on creativity, purpose, and the link between art and mental health?
I think when I was younger, I didn't realize the connection. And I think because of that, I'm that much better suited to be a therapist who works with artists today, because the very same kind of misguided thinking that I had when I first became an A&R guy is still present today. And thankfully, because of some good mentors that I've had over the years, I feel like whereas I started really young in A&R and I could have gone down one path, I was kind of steered in another way. And by example, and like I said, a couple of mentors that I had, and I'm happy to mention them, but I just became a better person. I became a better guide. It's not surprising. I ended up like becoming a therapist with artists because I was always taught to elevate them, to put them on levels of respect and to humanize them. And they're not just another signing. And, working with Kenny McPherson and Greg Souders and Judy Stakey and some of the people who during my formative years at Warner Chappell really set me up for success on a commercial level, but also success as an artist advocate and an artist ally. I also learned a lot, and this was proximity, because one of my sisters was signed to RCA in the 90s, and I got to see the highs and the lows, and again the highs and lows again, the ups and downs of an artist's career from the inside, from a very personal perspective. So that benefited me as well.
David, how do our listeners reach you? What's the best way to make contact with you at Artist Services?
There's a website, and I'm on Instagram as well, but the website is artistservicestherapy.com, all one word.
We want to thank you so much, David, for taking the time to do this. This has been an extremely, not only beneficial, but very insightful conversation on what we feel is a very, very valuable and necessary topic to have. And I'm very, very grateful. And I know Eric is very grateful for your time for doing this with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate what you guys are doing and giving me voice. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, Eric, what a rich, incredible conversation on such a necessary and needed topic to talk about. Again, I think we talked about this before, but one of the things that I loved about this conversation with David is that unlike just a conversation, which is fine, about mental health, David actually comes from the very industry that we're talking about.
Right.
In other words, he is somebody who's been on the front lines. He's not only talking the talk, but he has walked the walk with people, which I think gives it an added heft and an added credibility.
And dealing with people that have been super successful in the industry and seeing the pitfalls of what people are going through.
That other therapists may not see in the way that David's seen it, because he's been right there all along. This is where I think his prior experience in the entertainment business, taught him the specific, and I think he spoke about, the unique triggers, whether it's of depression, anxieties that artists face, and he also highlights the whole thing of how creatives think differently and they experience emotions in perhaps a heightened way that can make monetizing their art, and he spoke about that, challenging.
Right.
And that's what I thought that's one aspect that I thought was really interesting about this particular conversation with David.
Yeah. And also you mentioned the mental health challenges. David emphasized how artists appreciate not having to explain, industry specific terms like royalty and the experiences of being dropped from labels, highlighting the importance of understanding the context of their work. And I think that this is something that, it's something that's not talked about a lot. I don't think we've ever, it's interesting because we had the perspective from, I call this like the 2-part episode that we've had with Ryan, because he was on the artist side dealing with the pitfalls of what happened to him and having such incredible success so early on, right out of the gate on his journey. And now you have somebody else that's coming from a different perspective that's seeing it from the business side, but yet dealing with the creatives that have had massive success and seeing the pitfalls and places that they've gone down. And the whole idea of not knowing royalty and the idea of being dropped from a label and what could that mean for the person psychologically. You climbed that mountaintop, you got signed to a label, let's say it's a major, and then it didn't come to fulfillment, and now you have to deal with the idea of getting dropped and how that plays in your psyche. Was I not good enough? And I mean, you've had millions of examples of people that have gotten dropped that we've talked about before that have gotten signed again and have had massive success. So it's these things that we haven't talked about before in this space where I think they need to be discussed. Ryan talked about this whole idea of making more educational things with within the major label system. David also talked about that too. And we kind of reiterated between both of those episodes and the importance of like, I want to see who's the first label, whether it's Warner, Universal, I'm talking about the majors now, that are going to introduce basically a mental health program for artists. I want to see who's the cutting edge person that's going to do that, because that's what's needed right now. Chappell Roan, which just had that huge speech at the Grammys talking about inequality and not getting, healthcare and all of those things. This is an important conversation that requires that to happen like now.
Absolutely, Eric. And one of the things I think that you just spoke about that's so important is that there's an underlying theme in the nature of what you were speaking about artists really seeing their worth and getting that, and not relying on someone else, a record deal, a manager, a tour, money or whatever, to tell them that they're worthy. That's a very, very important aspect. And I think that's what mental health and looking at your mental health and taking accountability for it and responsibility for yourself really begins.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.